Welcome, brothers and sisters, to the Meher Baba program. I'm Fred Stankus, along with my co-host, Suhas Ginde. Welcome, Suhas.
Thank you.
This is the Meher Baba program, and today's subject is heavens and planes. What are the heavens and planes? I mean, we always talk about heavens. We think of one heaven. And what are the planes? Suhas, can you just put in a nutshell, a capsule, what we're talking about?
Well, I'll try. In most explanations of life and evolution is mostly stressed. But usually after the human form is taken, according to Meher Baba, he says that there's an inner path that one takes, and that is going through the planes. The planes are actually, would be compared to, let's say, a railway station or an airport in a city. And the heavens are, should you disembark at a station and happen to go into the city, then being in the city is like being in the heaven. So it's basically where people get stuck or caught up in is in the heavens, and the planes are the exits through which they go to the next plane. And Baba has mentioned that there are 7 planes of involution, just like there are 7 stages of evolution in different forms. In the involution planes, the human consciousness goes higher and higher till in the final stages it becomes one with God, and that's called God realization. And that would be on the 7th plane, and that only comes through the grace of the Master. The other planes are interim stages on their ways on the path to get to the final goal.
I see. So we're referring to a publication called The Nothing and the Everything, compiled and published by Hermes Writer of Manifestation Incorporated, of course, authored by Baul Kalchuri. Baul was Meher Baba's close disciple and night watchman and tremendous scribe and author. And some of this information is from a secretive book that is yet to be discovered, and they're saying that Baba said about 10% of that book that Meher Baba dictated regarding various secrets and information about the progress of the soul are in this book. And so we're going to be sharing it with the audience today. Information that you probably would never hear from anybody, I don't care, any face of the earth, in an open type of subject discussion here. We're going to be reading from the Nothing and the Everything. And last program we just we finished sort of the first plane, just starting to scratch the surface of the second plane. Now, these advances of consciousness are for human beings, but when one becomes conscious of these higher levels of energy, the second plane, they also experience the subtle world. In other words, we're conscious of the gross world. Now, when one becomes conscious of the subtle world, it's a totally different experience. It's totally enhanced with tremendous bliss and energy. And so we're going to begin just basically discussing some of the things of the second plane and second heaven. They go hand in hand, as Suhas was saying. A good example would be, say you went to took a plane to Las Vegas, and suddenly you had maybe a 15-minute or a couple-hour layover, and you said, "Well, I've decided to go into the strip and see what's going on at the casinos and something." And you went down there and had such a good time, you forgot to go back to the station, to the airport, to take off, to go on maybe to another destination. And that's what the heavens are. The heavens are enchanting places for the pilgrim on the path. These are not physical places. The heavens are that of the subtle world, or the mental world eventually as we go on. So that's a difference. This is not the physical heavens. This is nothing for gross conscious souls. The gross conscious soul is conscious of only what we see in this creation. We're talking about levels of consciousness that have not probably been talked about.
And it's also they're states of being, of consciousness. They're not places where people actually go to.
Right.
It's states of being.
It's states of being.
There's one other point I want to make, Fred, is that you said in the introduction that Baba dictated the book. The book that he wrote, he actually wrote that in the 1920s.
Yes, he did. That's correct.
Found. He did not dictate that.
He wrote that book. Yes,
God
that's right.
Speaks, which came in later in the 50s, mid-50s,
Yes,
was
that's
dictated.
correct. Thank you.
Because Baba was observing silence, but he handwrote this when he started his ministry in
Yeah, so 10% of that book supposedly was taken and put into this publication.
This portion was dictated to Bhauji, who was his disciple, in 68 or 69, just before he dropped his body. Baba gave him some points, and then Bhau expanded on those.
Good.
So now we are into the
second plane.
Second plane, and now we're talking about the second heaven, because prior to that, last week we talked about the first heaven, which is sort of an interim stage. So if I may continue where we left off, the second heaven, called Alm-e-Ruhani, contains two sections or parts, heaven and hell. These are the same heaven and hell experienced by the gross conscious Jivatma after death. But the pilgrim on the second subtle plane experiences the happiness of heaven by his own will, and by his own will avoids the pain of hell. The second plane pilgrim has a gross or physical human body, but only directly uses his subtle body. He is in energy form, subtle consciousness, and subtle sanskaras or impressions to enjoy heaven. The pilgrim would become even more absorbed in the bliss, for Alm-e-Ruhani is unimaginably heavenly, without the intervention of the Sadguru or the perfect master. Unless a Sadguru helps such a pilgrim, he remains in heaven, wrapped in it, because the blissful experience is so enrapturing that the pilgrim himself becomes the enraptured. Alm-e-Ruhani is called the world of enlightenment, which means subtle enlightenment, not illumination. Here subtle light is bursting upon the second plane, and the pilgrim merges with the subtle power bursting within his own consciousness. While passing through the rapture of the second heaven, the pilgrim's subtle consciousness becomes clear. The pilgrim's sanskaras, or impressions, become purely subtle, and he is enlightened to use the subtle powers that seize him. The second heaven is enlightening because all opposites of heaven and hell, good and bad, pleasure and pain, are reconciled within the individual's subtle consciousness. He who becomes enlightened by enjoying the subtle world fully stands beyond heaven and hell and is beyond good and evil. The pilgrim on the second plane sees all of heaven and hell, the first plane, the ghosts in the astral, and the people in the gross world, but can avoid the pain of hell and the suffering of the world by his own will. The gross conscious human being experiences the heaven or hell of the second heaven after death in a different way. After dying, the human has no gross body, and though he experiences after death through the subtle body, the sanskaras that he is experiencing are gross. The gross conscious human passes through this blissful heaven only to spend his gross sanskaras, and in no way can he enjoy the happiness of this subtle heaven for its own sake. But the second plane pilgrim, being subtle conscious, also enjoys Alm-e-Ruhani totally for its own sake. Once a human being attains subtle consciousness, he does not pass through the states of heaven or hell when he dies. The pilgrim of the second plane sees heaven and hell, but because his consciousness is clear, he is absorbed in the enjoyment of the happiness of heaven. The pilgrim enjoys the heaven of Alm-e-Ruhani while incarnate, an experience thousands of times more intense than an ordinary gross conscious man can imagine. The hell of the second heaven is not experienced by the pilgrim. The hell of Alme Ruhani is real hell, with two parts or sections, higher and lower hell. Hell is for the beneficial experience of gross conscious people, to spend their excess, bad, and unnatural impressions collected. Ordinary bad and unnatural sanskaras such as lying, stealing, promiscuity, gluttony, greed, jealousy, etc. are spent in the higher hell state of consciousness. People who have committed some terribly binding gross action in their past life, such as suicide, murder, genocide, spiritual hypocrisy, such as false gurus and false saints, enter the lower hell where the deepest and darkest stains of ignorance can be spent consciously. The most unnatural act of suicide results in the worst after-death experience. Suicide severely checks the natural progress of human consciousness and should be avoided. The human Jivatma who commits suicide remains suspended in the subsubtle or astral world for centuries as a ghost, because he himself cut short millions of gross sanskaras which were meant to be spent in his last life. The suicide without a gross body of his own must gradually spend each and every one of his leftover sanskaras as a ghost through temporary possession of other gross human or animal bodies. This process of possessing other bodies takes a very long time, several centuries, as the ghost has to find a suitable medium for each set of gross impressions such as smoking, drinking, eating, fornicating, etc. Suicide is the cause of many unnatural sanskaras, and the purpose of the human body is quite distorted during extreme unnatural acts of possession. Once the purpose of the human body is distorted, the human consciousness becomes distorted. There's no such phenomenon as demonic possession, and demonic entities do not exist. Such entities are the ghosts of suicides.
Wow. We've got to discuss that. So many people look upon demonic possession, as being something valid. And here Baba states that there is no such phenomena as demonic possession, or demonic entities do not exist. He says, and such entities are the ghosts of suicides. And like he says, once you continue, they're both good and bad ghosts.
Yeah, these are people who have cut themselves off from the gross world prematurely, thus shortening cutting off the sanskaras from being expressed in a physical body. So they have to take on other bodies of other people living in the gross body. So there are good and bad ghosts, just as there are good and bad, high and low, natural and unnatural degrees of human consciousness. It is because of centuries of possessing others' bodies to use up sanskaras that some ghosts are frightening. Actually, the human consciousness has become distorted, and that distortion of consciousness is frightening. It is one part of the work of the avatar and the sadgurus to help ghosts of suicides to use up the sanskaras quickly and thereby obtain for them a sufficient balancing of gross sanskaras to precipitate another human birth.
Oh, so this is part of the work of the avatar and sadgurus, is to work with these ghosts of suicides, to help them. Because one thing I'm impressed here with, is the fact that where it says the consciousness is a distortion of consciousness. What is that exactly in your own interpretation? In other words, and possessing other people's bodies. In other words, the example is this: you don't have the physical medium, you've committed suicide, but you still have the your ghostly body, or you have a subtle body and a mental body, but you're not conscious of those. You're experiencing physical impressions
without the body.
You don't have the body, and you can't experience subtle impressions or mental impressions. You don't have a body, but you have physical needs. You have physical wants, physical desires. And so, can you imagine the dilemma?
Mm-hmm.
The soul can't move over and cross over into the heaven or hell experiences, which will give him a chance to more or less sort out the things that have been done.
Mm-hmm.
He has to stay in this suspended transit, not even, it's all transitory, but it's a suspension of his being able to work things out. So he's looking for a weak link, a person that maybe is a drunkard, a drug addict, somebody who's maybe very volatile or angry. In other words, they have to basically occupy those kind of beings in order to get the impressions that they need. Is that what basically?
They need to experience. The impressions have to be experienced in human life.
Yeah, but they're looking for somebody that maybe is vulnerable, so they could enter their being.
What happens when a suicide takes place is his impressions have been cut short by the fact that he doesn't have a body anymore, but they're gathered up again in the subtle and the mental worlds. But he needs a medium, such as a body or a gross form, to express those impressions. That's why not having the body makes it distorted. That's what he's saying here. That the purpose of the human body and not having that to express these sanskaras, the whole situation for the ghost becomes distorted. So he needs to occupy another body of somebody in the gross plane like we are.
And the ghost is a result of a termination of his life before... Premature. In other words, most deaths are not ghosts. People that die...
It's a natural death.
People who die naturally traverse and go over to the other side, to the heaven or hell state. Suicides don't. How about a traumatic death in the military? You step on a landmine. And
well, that is not a suicide. A suicide is someone who takes his own life.
So what you're saying then, even though the person was prematurely annihilated in his prime,
it's very possible that he may take on another body immediately and be born again.
That person that was killed in war or in battle.
Someone who, let's say, gets into an accident and has not had the opportunity to...
I mean, how about those souls of 9/11 in the towers?
They may have taken on birth in other families within a matter of seconds. Or depending on their sanskaras, they could be still in a state of...
So that has nothing to do with being ghosts. Ghosts are those souls who are unfortunate that they sever their life through artificial, or she's not artificial, they sever their life before their impressions were used or in a given life by taking their own life and premeditating it. And
who consciously take their own life. Now, when you get hit by a car, or if the people in 911
that's like your karma, I guess.
They were not aware of the situation prior to it happening.
So ghosts only result... I mean, how about if one has an intense attachment? Say you have an intense attachment to your house and your family, and suddenly you're taken away by illness. Illness takes you away. You're sick and you die, but you can't get over the loss. You don't want to leave your family. Can you be a ghost then?
Well, not according to what Baba is saying. Baba says only in situations where there's a suicide, he's prematurely cut off the natural progress of the experience of his sanskaras. And in order for him to experience these sanskaras without having actually gone into the subtle and the mental world with his consciousness, he comes back, he's attached to the gross world, so he comes back and he needs another body that he can take over. It's probably somebody who's weak. And that's how these people suddenly become frightening, as he says, because they've been taken over by a spirit, a disembodied spirit, which is a ghost. Their situations, they're always looking to, this happens a lot sometimes in the rural areas, like in India and so on. I don't know if the ghosts come into the city so much.
And also it says that the ghosts sometimes may suffer for centuries because maybe what would have took 10 or 20 years in a natural physical form, in order to work those physical impressions out,
Yes.
it's going to take hundreds of years to find the proper instrument of a person that they could possess to work those things out, which you have to really have compassion for those suicides, disembodied spirits who are really in a place to where they must be suffering immensely.
Oh, yes. But again, time in the subtle world is different from time in our world. They have a different, it's a different measurement. It's not like how we say, what time is it in our clock time. So when it talks about centuries, it could probably be a very long time. But that's something that that person may or may not be aware of. See?
So it's best to weather the storm of your life and not go over the deep end and take your life.
It's best to follow a natural process. You live the best way you know how, and when it's time for you to go, it's time for you to go. Because that's what it's meant.
Because in the end, there is no end, as Meher Baba states.
Well, death is not the finality of life. It's only in transition. Baba has said before that when you go to sleep at night, you wake up the next day in the same body, and when you pass away, you wake up in another body. It's no different than taking off your clothes at night to put on your sleeping clothes, and you get up in the morning and you put on your clothes to go to work. So that's the difference between sleep and death. One is just temporary, where you wake up in the same body. The other is kind of permanent, where you are disembodied from one body and you take birth in another body. And it could be immediately, it could be several years or long time. Depends on how these sanskaras are balanced out in the subtle planes. After death, what he's talking here in these planes while you're still in the body. When people are in the other planes of existence that we are not aware of. You've seen musts in India that are highly advanced beings, but they're stuck within a certain plane, meaning they're stuck in the heavens. And one part of the work of the avatars is also to help the musts, release them from the heavens so they can advance through the planes to the next level and not get stuck. Like being stuck in a city because of they're enraptured by the allurements of the planes, or the heavens, I should say.
So I'm continuing.
The city outside the train station or the airport. The two states of consciousness called heaven and hell are temporal states of mind, for the mind bound in grossness, and are experienced subtly in gross time spans. These states are necessary to review consciously one's most recent past life through the new, good or bad sanskaras collected from one's gross actions. The states of heaven and hell in Alme Ruhani are a great relief for gross conscious human beings after death, as the good and bad impressions accumulated are mostly consumed in either state, thereby balancing the individual's consciousness. If this relief from one's own good or bad sanskaras were not existent, it would be impossible for any human to progress toward involution, as it would take so long to spend the gross sanskaras embodied.
We have to stop here and talk about this.
Okay.
This is really, really enlightening. Mm-hmm. In other words, you pass on, you die.
Yes.
You take with you your, we'll call it like a ledger, an accountant's ledger. You have liabilities and you have assets. The assets are, I guess, your good deeds. Liabilities are your bad deeds.
Okay.
And you carry this. It's like, or let's use it like they're tangible things, you could say, even
like
though...
a balance forward.
Yes. But so you have more assets than liabilities. It's, I guess you are rewarded with the heaven state of mind. Mm-hmm. But as Baba says here, you have to spend those and get rid of those to balance your account. In other words, say if you had, I'm just saying 100 to 50, 50 bad, 100 good, you balance the 50, you wear them out, you experience the heaven state, and when you reach the 50-50 point, 50 bad, 50 good, you're balanced. So that's when you are reincarnated again.
Well, there's a near balancing.
Near balancing.
It's not a complete
balancing
equation where it's zeroed out.
I see.
It's a near balance. I've read a little bit further into this, but basically it says when you do the near balancing within your own life, then you don't come back. If you do it within your body. But if you do it outside the body after death, then you take on another body.
I see. So just the reverse form, if you had more liabilities than assets, you'd be experiencing the heaven, experiencing the hell state, experiencing the pain and suffering, all these things created. And then as you spend them off, getting rid of this garbage, this luggage, and you're nearing to balancing with the good of your own self, that's when you reincarnated also. And Baba says, which I think is so key, it said, it would be impossible for any human to progress towards involution, and it would take so long to spend the gross sanskars in body without experiencing and the purging of them in the heaven or hell state.
Which takes place in the subtle planes.
But it's a necessary thing. People have to realize that it's a necessary part of our existence to go to the heaven or hell state, to purge these things, because you can't continue on. So you've got to experience the heaven or the hell state in order to experience those things, and then as you experience them, then you rid them. In other words, all the good things in your life, even though they're considered in our society as better than bad, they're still binding. You can be bound by all this good stuff because you're accumulating things of the gross, conscious thing, which is not reality.
So both are necessary, because balancing can't take place without two sides to the equation. So both good and bad impressions are necessary, and at the same time, death is also necessary in the larger picture of life, because there's only life, and life moves on, maybe not within the same body, but from bodies to bodies. Thus, reincarnation of the soul reincarnates in bodies, and that's necessary for the progression of consciousness. That's all he's talking about, is the consciousness gets impression by sanskaras, and then they have to be experienced. They create more sanskaras, and then, so the game keeps going on and on until you come in contact with a perfect master, and when you deserve his grace, then he can wipe them out by his grace. And that's the end game. That's when he gives you God realization, or you have that. And you have to do that in the body, not outside the body. So you don't have to reincarnate anymore. When you achieve God realization, that's the end of the game. You don't need to reincarnate. You become absorbed into the highest consciousness of the master. Or as a river goes into the ocean and becomes one, it's just ocean. So,
well, I see we got the 1 minute sign, Suhas. So what we'll do is we'll pick up next week about this place, the same place. So we're just basically finishing with the second heaven, second plane. So next week we'll begin also, we'll talk about the third plane. And I doubt if we'll be able to finish that, but we'll continue this series as we go along. For Suhas Ginde, I'm Fred Stankus. Remember, as Meher Baba says, do your best in life, leave the rest to God. Don't worry, be happy in my love. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.